Jayson, it's been a minute since we've had the opportunity to be in person and chat, and I really appreciate you making time to be here for the conversation today.
Hell yeah, Mike. It's so good to see you. And I'm ready to hang out with you.
So you wrote a book called Getting to Zero, which is an unbelievable book about conflict in relationships. I mean, relationships in general, but really, I think you've done a fantastic job of honing in on how destructive conflict can be and how we can build up resentment, how we can not see ourselves in the conflict and blame others, and how none of these things support the kind of relationships that I think all of us want to have in our life. And it's so beautifully written, so thoughtful, and so practical. And so you've got that as a launching off point for your relationship school and the work that you do with couples and with entrepreneurial couples and even partners in business to support
Hmm.
their conflicts and to support their working relationships. Where I want to kind of launch off this conversation is like, you've had so much time and experience in this space, and you know so much now that you probably see the nuances of the gray as opposed to maybe the black and white. I'm really curious to know if you think back to when you first started in this space and think of how you thought about relationships and how you thought about conflict back then versus where you sit today. Like, walk us through that journey of your own learning and what your belief pattern is today.
Yeah, cool. I mean, in short, I got into all of this work because I was in a lot of pain relationally. I just was that guy that was keeping women at an arm's length and blaming, them basically for my relationship problems. That eventually led me to graduate school to become a psychotherapist, which was where I met my wife. And as we got together, so I went from like total ignorance, thinking it's the other person's fault, to eventually I have a part in this. And as my wife and I got together, we kind of had a spiritual frame back when I started really working with couples and started the relationship school, which was, hey, you're triggered, I'm triggered, you go deal with your stuff, I'll go deal with mine in our separate rooms, and we'll just go meditate and do yoga, and kind of that's how we'll get through conflict. Well, later I didn't know about the nervous system and trauma in the brain and attachment science. And eventually, through my wife's help, we would learn all that stuff. And then raising two children taught me so much more. And I was like, oh, this is like a nervous system game.
Mm.
And it actually is more efficient if we help each other's nervous systems than if we go off in separate areas of the house to deal with our own nervous systems. Because that's repeating our childhood for a lot of us, is like, go to your room because you're
Right.
crying and deal with it by
Right.
yourself. We're relational social mammals. It's not great to deal with these things by ourselves.
So the
So that's what I,
shift then,
quick
yeah.
summary.
And so I think this shift of as I hear you say that, I think about my nervous system as being like inside of me, somewhat not really in my control, but kind of in my control. And, um, and then I think about the other person's nervous system that I'm in relationship with. And what I hear you saying is like, yeah, self-soothing in the corner, or, going to your own corners or going to your room to kind of like sort this out is not actually helping to stabilize both people's nervous system. So there must be some type of energetic connection that is occurring as a result of being together and helping to sort through this, as opposed to separating, which really feels like hoping it goes away. And I'm sure in many cases could actually just mean the buildup of resentment.
That's right. Yeah. And I'm sure you and your partner experienced this where you tell me you get activated, she does something and you guys are in a snag of some kind, we're hijacked, right? There's something goes on. And look, it's fine if your wife's not available to like help yourself, like be there for yourself. That's a really good practice we all should know how to do.
Right.
But if the two of you can come together like a team and help each other out and navigate the challenge between you as a team, it's being sensitive to the way you react. I think it's just a much more efficient game. But I'm curious what happens in your home.
Yeah. I mean, I think being in this world of leadership development, I remember when Sabrina and I first met, she's like, nobody talks like you. Why do you talk like that? It's weird. And then one day she came home and she was sharing a conversation she had with one of her friends at dinner. And I was laughing, and she's like, it's not funny. She's in conflict. I'm like, I know. It's just that you sound like me in how you were describing it
Uh-huh.
to her. And so over time, she was hearing how I spoke, and then she was on her own journey of learning and learning how she wanted to show up and reading and researching. And so she got her own language around it. And now we kind of live in a place today where um, we still get in conflict because we're two independent people wanting to do big things in the world and also be in relationship. And so that can
Yeah.
just naturally lead to conflict. We also see the world differently. We see the world the same in some places, but we're just different people. And so
Yeah.
inherently that can lead to ideological conflict. Sometimes there's interpersonal conflict about who left what on the floor and, left a mess
Mm-hmm.
in the kitchen or all those sorts of things. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what has happened for both of us over time, we've been together for over 16 and a half years, is we learned how to take responsibility for our part in it
Yeah.
and to come to the other
Huge.
person and park our ego. And because we both fundamentally believe that sometimes you're in the choice of whether you want to be right or happy, and both of us want to be happy. And so to be happy requires us to step back and go, hey, like I kind of said it this way, and the look on my face, like that wasn't helpful. And I get that that's what kind of precipitated this. And the
Mm-hmm.
response is then, yeah, and also how I responded wasn't helpful too. And so there's this
Yeah.
meeting of it. And what I've noticed is that the time, like sometimes it would take us a while, like we would go off to our corners and then come back.
Mm-hmm.
And what I notice now is that the time between what I'll call the triggering event, as you said, and resolution is actually quite small relative to where it was at the beginning of our relationship. And I say
Mm.
that with the thought that like we actually made a conscious choice not to get pregnant with our daughter and not even actually to get married until we got really good at being in conflict and getting through it. Because we
Wow.
said if we can't
That's so
get good at
mature.
that, then well, we were 36 and 35 when we met, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we weren't in our early 20s. And so we got good at that, and then we felt like we were good enough at that. We're like, we can probably bring another, tiny human being into the world, and because that's going to put a lot of pressure and stress on our relationship. And I remember when Lily wasn't sleeping through the night, and we're at the like 16-month mark, and we had this phrase we would use with each other, which was, "I'm super frustrated right now, not at you, but at the situation that we're in right now, and you're the closest adult." And that was our way of saying,
Nice.
hey, we know this conflict exists right now, or we're feeling this frustration. And you're the adult in the room. That little other person is like a 16-month-old. So you're getting the
Mm-hmm.
brunt of this. And that was our way of kind of like signaling to each other that we knew that we were in this place, that we weren't making it about the other person, that we were facing the
Yep.
situation. We weren't the
Mm-hmm.
situation, but we were facing it together, and we needed to solve this for each other. That's been a process, Jason. Like honestly, it's taken the 16 years to get us where we are today. And I am, my wife's done her own journey of getting to the place that she is as a communicator. And what I love is that I see it reflected in our daughter and how she shows up and how she deals with conflict. And my
Mm.
wife spends more time with her overall, I would say, if I was to look at the math. And so I
Yeah.
really do credit Sabrina with growing that way as a woman. And then also, we created a little clone of her and of the two of us, and instilling that skill set in Lily.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot I could say about what you said there, which was, first of all, I love people who aren't um, in my shoes where you study this stuff for a living as a therapist or a coach. I mean, you're in the leadership space, so you do study this stuff to some degree, but like partnership, isn't your everyday, you're not teaching courses in marriage, right?
No.
And so it's so cool to hear what people like you come up with. And I just want to underline a few things. Like the theme I heard there was communication, that we
Mm-hmm.
own our part, right? We acknowledge the other person is impacted. We have a way to things to say in stressful moments, and we face it, like a team, and we've gotten more efficient over time. And I just want to say that it seems like to me, you tell me, the summary here is you guys have learned how to become better and better communicators through stressful moments between you and around you. Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. And I want to underscore for listeners right now, if you're listening to this and thinking I've painted this Pollyanna picture, of, this perfect relationship. And it's not perfect. It's that we are committed to communicating and we're committed to working on it. And
Yeah.
we made a promise to each other that we would do that through before we got married, that was the way we were going to show up for each other.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're continually learning from each other. We're continually growing. It's not that we're not in conflict. And I want that to be super clear. Like, we
Totally.
get in conflict all the time. It's just that the period of time that we stay in conflict and how we deal with the conflict has continually gotten shorter in terms of the duration, and better in terms of how she and I communicate through it. And it's wild to see it reflected in our daughter's behaviors, how she deals with
Yeah.
conflict, how she deals with difficult conversations. We can see that we didn't teach her that. She's literally watched it occur. And then we see her reflected back. And Sabrina and I talk all the time. We're like, good God, it's so good we took the time to get good at this stuff, because now
Mm-hmm.
we have this 12-year-old and we're seeing it from her. And literally, like, after, Lily comes forward to share something with us or share a concern or whatever, we both walk out of the room. We're like, did she really just, like, that was phenomenal what she just did there, right? Like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the truest thing I can say, is that it's a conscious effort. It's not easy. It's a choice we made, and we have to keep making that choice every day. It just doesn't, like, it's some of these things naturally happen now because we just from habit. And the harder the conversation is, the more we have to be grounded in those tech tools and techniques, and just really stick to them, and honor this sort of difference between being right and being happy.
Yeah. Love it. You also had an agreement at the beginning, which was, hey, before we start a family, essentially, let's get good at this stuff. We need to be
Yeah.
good communicators. I mean, that alone right there is advice I give all the time to people about to get married. I'm just like, look, don't get married. Don't even get married. Don't even have kids until you get your shit together, basically, around communication, being able to work through conflict and repair it. If you can get good at that, like, anything's possible. And so I just love that you two started with that, to your imperfect, of course, relationship where there's still conflict. But that's like an anchor for couples. If they can begin with a context that says something like what you guys had in place, it's going to save a lot of headache and heartache down the road.
The other thing that somebody said, was visiting a buddy in Dubai, and we were chatting about relationships. And I can't remember why we got in this conversation. And it was the beginning of my relationship with Sabrina. And he said to me, I need to give you this visual to hold on to. He said, you're not a boat. You're not two boats in the stormy ocean together. You are a lighthouse grounded in concrete, mounted on granite. And if you envision that you were that way, and Sabrina has emotions coming up, or has some stuff going on in her world that's causing her to be just in conflict, even just with herself,
Mm-hmm.
uh, don't go out. Don't jump in the boat and go out into that frothy ocean. You got to let her know that you're a lighthouse. And what is a lighthouse's job? It's got one job. It's to provide a light that shows where safe harbor is. And that way, no matter how big her storm gets, right, nothing's going to happen to the lighthouse. If you go out in the ocean, well, things happen to boats in big storms. And I've held on to that. That was in 2010 that he said that to me. And I've held on to that ever since as an anchoring piece, so that I know I need to be in that place. Interestingly, both of us have played that role for each other. And as well, we play that role for our daughter. And we've taught her that analogy as well, that, like, sometimes you're going to have big emotions, and we're not going to get swept up in those emotions with you, but we will be here for you. We're not going anywhere. We're going to stand still. And it is
Yeah.
safe for you to come here, and it is safe for you to be, and you can throw anything you want at us, but, like, honestly, it doesn't matter. We're a lighthouse. And we started talking to her about that when she was quite little. And we still have that conversation with her today. And we still have that conversation as a couple, when each of us knows that that's kind of the role the other person needs right now. Like, when I've got stressful stuff going on in business, Sabrina will say to me, like, hey, I'm not in your world, but I can hold space for you, and I can be a lighthouse as you navigate that frothy sea. But I'm not coming out there with you in it. I'm going to be back here. And
Yeah.
for me, knowing that my partner, in my wife, is there in that space, allows me to say, okay, she's the anchoring point right now. because I don't feel grounded and anchored. Like I am definitely in the frothy sea, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful that she can be that. It's tougher when both of you, like when say both of us are in that position, then we really have to be gentle with each other and give each other a lot of grace, because neither of us feels like we can be a lighthouse and we're both in the frothy sea together. And that
Yeah.
happens too as part of being a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. That's funny you use the lighthouse metaphor. I actually use the boat metaphor because I really like partnership. I see as such a huge adventure that it's like backpacking through the middle of nowhere, or it's being out in the ocean on this little boat. And I often say if you have a partner where you're not both pulling your weight and only one of you has got the paddle and the other one's just chilling, like, oh, I don't need to do the work and I could just hang out here, where are you going to go? And you're going to go in a circle.
Right.
and and the ocean, as you described there, is full of all kinds of challenges. And if we don't act like a team out here, our boat is going to sink. And so I'm just playing off the sort of boat ocean lighthouse metaphor.
I love that.
Like
No, I'm stealing that, man. I'm 100% taking that analogy because that's beautiful. The thought of, as a couple, when you're both in that frothy ocean, I've never had an analogy for that. And it's great because if we're one of us was rowing and the other isn't, and we're not communicating while we're rowing, it's like not good. And the sea is fraught with things that want to sink our boat.
Yep.
So yeah, that's great. I'm definitely stealing that.
Yeah, it's like if it gets really bad, I want to go down with her, right? I want this thing to sink with her. I don't want to be thrown out of the boat. I don't want to throw her out of the boat. Right. But it's going to get holes in it and it's going to need some work, and there's going to be storms and there's going to be sunny days. We're just up for the adventure. And if couples can remember that marriage or long-term partnership is an adventure, then it just changes your attitude about the whole thing. You're not always looking to be at the park with the sun out. You're like, no, this is an adventure. We don't know what's going to happen next year, next week. So let's be good to each other so that we can face what's up ahead.
I'm twigging my curiosity here. I'm curious, like, so you've worked with, you might know the number of couples and partners you've worked with for over all the years, but I'm sure it's in the thousands. Yeah. And I guess my curiosity goes to this place. Like, what are the core themes? Like you have a view at this stage where you're like, yeah, there's kind of like this many things that are at the root of most of the challenges that couples bring to the table that are kind of like the starting point, that you're like, it's usually one of these X number of things. Like, what are the things that put us in a place of struggling to be in relationship with an intimate partner that have been core themes you've witnessed over all your years?
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep this concise because there's much I could say. But first of all, our relational blueprint impacts our adult relationships. And that just means your earliest attachment relationships, 0 to 18, really do impact how you are in an intimate partnership later on, because it's different than our friendships because the dependency is different. Right. So it turns on a switch inside of our nervous system and our brain that is like the family. And that's why it can get so hard and so challenging and crunchy. So I'd say if couples can have that as a reminder, it's like, oh, this might not be personal. The way I act is coming from my past often, and that's okay. But the journey of partnership is like to get better, especially if we grew up in a compromised environment of any kind, neglect or abuse or trauma or whatever, a little or a lot. We want to have the aspiration to do this thing better than was done for us. And if there was only one thing I could tell people out of everything I teach, it's to get very, very good at communication through the conflict repair cycle. If couples can figure out that, then they can pretty much do anything. And that requires that two people participate in that kind of agreement. That's like, let's get really good at repairing any conflict, because as you said, conflict's not the problem. It's inevitable. It's going to happen throughout the year, the day, the week. We're going to butt up against each other. We're going to disagree. We're going to have challenges. But if we know how to work through the communication breakdowns and get better and better at that, then it's kind of like anything's possible. And so in the end of the day, it's not that complicated. It's like, have a view that this thing's an adventure, understand your past is playing out in the present, and get really, really good at communication through the conflict repair cycle. And it's kind of like you can't lose.
So having the self-awareness, as you say, to understand your relational blueprint, that I'm playing out the relationships that I was most attached to between 0 and 18. And so I can look back in my family life, I can look back in my close social circles and say, okay, yeah, I can see where these influences came from. And so with that knowledge in mind, that's a great starting point. And when I get into relationship and I can recognize, hey, I'm playing out a pattern that has nothing to do with the person that I'm in relationship with. This has to do with childhood stuff that I'm kind of trauma and other things, just patterns, habits, what I witnessed, and it's playing out. Then I get to this place where I'm in conflict. Explain to me how does a person go through that conflict repair cycle? Like, what is that cycle? What does that cycle look like?
It looks like, and I call it a cycle because it's going to happen. It's going to go in a circle for the rest of our life. We're just going to come in and out of conflict the rest of our life. We're going to feel good and connected to our partner one day. The next day, we're going to feel disconnected and bad. And, I'm being black and white about it, but it's more or less that's the journey. And so if we know that, then we're like, then I should apply myself around conflict repair. So conflicts like you and I disagree about something. No, that's not what I said, Mike. How come you did that? I blame you for something. You shut down, and now we're in our thing, right? And that part is hard to help. It's like the brain and the nervous system together work to protect you under stress from the other person, right? You're just going into self-protection of some kind, whether it's to blame or to shut down or whatever. And so we've got to be able to recover and reconnect. And that's where the research shows that the more you can recover and reconnect together, the more secure the foundation of your relationship will be. And so a couple little things I can do. You've mentioned one, which is we can take responsibility for our part all the time, right? No matter what happens, it's like I've got a part. And I can use this sentence stem that I like to share with people, which is my part is blank, and I can imagine the impact on you was blank. And then I try to empathize with how they must have felt. That must have hurt your feelings, Mike. I raised my voice, and the impact on you was that you probably got hurt and scared. That alone can start to settle the nervous system. Whenever anyone takes responsibility, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it's just so nice to be around people to do that.
Yeah.
It's just like, my shoulders relax. I'm like, oh, thank you. Something else we can do, a lot of people resort to the apology. I always say, do the apology at the end if your partner needs an apology. Some partners, some nervous systems, the apology does absolutely nothing. It's much better to hear my part is, I can imagine the impact on you was. And then the third thing is like validating their feelings. And it makes sense you feel sad. It makes sense you are hurt. It makes sense that you got angry. And then if you do that for me, it's like, wow, we're already doing so much better because we both care and we're listening. Another tool I teach is listening to the other person until they feel understood. Not that, and I call that LUFU, L-U-F-U. It's not listen to wait my turn so that I can, interject what happened for me. No, I'm doing generosity and listening. And I'm saying, no, Mike, I'm going to listen to you until you feel understood. So those are just a few things people can do to practically to repair any conflict.
One of the challenging pieces in that listening part of it, and we see this with leaders, is when they're in conflict, is the concept of listening for understanding, the LUFU, not for agreement.
Right.
And so people kind of get stuck into like, well, if I, repeat back what that person said, it sounds like I agree with what they're saying and I don't. It's like, you don't have to agree with it. You just have to let the other person know that you understand them. It's kind of like that old adage of like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so start with empathy, start with curiosity, be able to, paraphrase and reflect back what it must be like for that person, what my action was and what it was like for them. And when they feel heard and understood, their ability to listen for understanding for you grows immensely. And through that, neither of you are looking for agreement in that first piece, right? We're just looking to have understanding. And sometimes through the act of understanding, there's some piece of agreement that can occur in the middle of it. You could also end up in an impasse, right? Like it's possible that both those things can occur. And at least you're operating in a much more psychologically safe environment to be able to try to de-escalate and solve the conflict when both people feel that they've actually genuinely been heard by the other.
Yeah. Yeah. You nailed it. I mean, listening alone will move mountains. And it is amazing to me. It's shocking to me how many people really don't know how to listen generously, especially if energy is coming at them, right? They don't know the Aikido move is to listen, not to like push back with more blame or defensiveness. It's like, no, just understand why this person's so upset with you. Like, I did this. What did I do? Oh, okay. Yeah. What else did I do? Oh, that makes sense that you're upset about that. Okay. And I want to underline again something you said, which is people think that listening means the other person's right. Mm-hmm. In my world, I notice a lot of couples have a hard time with the validation, that specific skill, which is 3 words. That makes sense. Your feelings make sense.
Yeah.
They can't do it because they think it means you're right. If I validate your feelings, it means you're right. And I'm like, look, here's my statement to validation is validation has absolutely nothing to do with right and wrong. It's just about everybody's experience is 100% valid. And when you get that and you actually get it in your body, it's like, cool, I don't have to defend myself anymore.
So validation to me sounds like saying to the other person, like, I honor that you feel this way and you're allowed to feel that way.
Yeah. My favorite way to say it is, Mike, it makes sense that you feel frustrated with me because I didn't get the report in on time.
And that's a beautiful,
your feelings, Mike, make sense.
Yeah. And that's a simple, like, I love the simplicity of that statement because it takes ownership for the action that it occurred, the thing happened, and it honors the feeling that action created in the other person. And it doesn't matter whether I think it's okay or not okay, or that they should or shouldn't feel that way, right? Like that part doesn't matter because that's not what matters to that other person.
Yeah. We got to get out of this "that's not what happened" thing of like the facts, like the attorney types that want to listen for facts and just like want to keep score. I'm like, no, that's not listening again. You're back in your pattern that you did in your family of origin. That's not going to get you what you want here.
And it's interesting because, when you look at eyewitness statements and I'm sure, many listeners have seen like the 60-minute episodes where they set up a crime it's fake crime. And then they poll the people that are around to ask, like, how tall was the individual? What were they wearing? How fast did they move? What happened in the situation? And they get back the wildly different accounts of the same scenario. And so you would think to yourself, well, how's that possible? Those people were all there. They all witnessed the, fake crime occur. How could they not agree on what occurred? Right. So if that's true, and the reality is that in that scenario, my emotional attachment to that would be very low. Right? Like I don't know, this thing happened. This person's interviewing me about it. I don't have a big attachment to it. Maybe it was exciting that this thing happened in front of me, but I'm not in an intimate relationship with the pretend burglar or whatever. And so I can only imagine that take that concept of how we all view the world from the lens of our filters, from our lived experiences, from, our viewpoint, from where we were even standing at the time. And our experience of it can be quite different, and how we share it with others will be quite different. And, we're grounded in our belief pattern because as far as we're concerned, that's what happened. Like I saw it. This is what happened. This is what you said. Ignoring the fact that I'll add in, which is that we whitewash most of our past. Otherwise, psychologically, it would be incredibly damaging. And so the longer away from the event is, the more likely we are to have altered the event in our mind. Imagined usually that we were a better person, that we were the calmer one, that what we said was less inflammatory, that the other person was the person that made this whole thing wrong. And the further we are from the conflict left unresolved, the more I know with myself, I would feel more grounded in my belief of what actually occurred. And it's just one perspective. And it took me a while to really sit with that when I first learned this concept and realize that I'm interpreting and assuming much of my world. And it differs from how other people in the same scenario are doing the same thing.
Totally. Yeah. And the other thing people don't understand is when like you're pointing out, the farther we are from the thing, the more flawed our memory is. And the more it goes into long-term memory. Like, this is why it's so essential to repair conflicts as soon as possible, so that it doesn't go into long-term memory and compound and stack on all the other things that never got resolved. So, and then building up resentments, right? So we always tell couples, like, make a commitment to repair within 24 hours, or at least initiate the repair process. And granted, there's some big ruptures in life that take weeks to resolve with our busy schedules. But we want to, as couples, as partners, we want to get very good at being efficient, as you and your wife have seen over the years, right? You just, with practice, you get more efficient over time.
What I love about your 24-hour rule is it kind of flies in the face of this adage that I've always felt troubled by, which is don't go to bed angry. I'm like, you know what? Sometimes the conflict happened right before you got to go to bed, and everybody's got to wake up the next morning. And so I love the grace that the 24 hours provides of, like, maybe it isn't, and maybe it isn't the right time. Maybe it still feels too heated, and it's better to just, sleep on this, but let's make a point of coming back as soon as we can tomorrow within 24 hours to be able to start that conflict repair cycle. I like that a lot more than that old adage of, don't never go to sleep angry with the person you're in a relationship with.
I believed that for a while too. And my wife this is many years ago when our kids were younger, those sleepless nights. And I just, for whatever reason, had a lot of mojo in the evening, and she was tapped out at like 9:00, and we'd get into a fight of some kind and be laying in bed. And I'd be like, no, we got to stay up and sort this out. And she's like tapped out. She's done. Yeah. And I'm forcing her to have a conversation with me, and it would make it worse. And so we just did this for a while, and it was like, I was like, no, we have to be committed to like getting through this. And eventually I was like, you know what? It's so much better the next day when she's more resourced and ready to have the conversation. And I can just relax and go to bed. Like, what's the big deal?
We have a thing that we teach leaders around context, because what you're talking about is context. Is the context right for us to repair this, to get into that conflict repair cycle? Or do we need to wait till the context is better? And with leaders, when we're teaching them feedback, whether the feedback is constructive or whether it's, praising feedback, we say to them, when you reach out to a person, say, I have some feedback for you. Is now a good time for us to talk? Right. When I call people, which is weird now in like 2024 to like call somebody out of the blue, I think most of us will text first before we call a person. So every time I do it, I always apologize. I'm like, sorry, I'm a Gen Xer. I just called weirdly out of the blue. But when I call someone and they answer the phone, I say to them, hey, I just wanted to have a chat with you. Is now a good time for you to talk? And the number of people who have said to me, I'm actually just in the middle of a meeting. I'm just walking out the door. I'm just dropping my kid off at soccer. I'm just ... like all the time. And whereas the natural thing is to just person answers, you just dive into the conversation, they would be distracted, right? I'm not really getting their full attention or presence because they're doing the other thing that they should be doing.
And they don't want to offend you, right? Because they're trying to be nice, polite.
Yeah. There's a social context to that too, right? As you say. And so, what the pattern that we get leaders into is like, ask the context by just saying, is now a good time for you to talk? Or do you have time to talk? And somebody can say, no, call me back in an hour. And I'm like, cool. Cause I know in an hour, I'm going to get that person's 100% time and attention because they're going to be prepared for me and they're going to be ready to talk. And I'll even text people that in advance to say, hey, I was going to give you a quick shout, but like, is now a good time? And then they'll say no. And sometimes I'm like, today's not even good. I'm like, cool, I'll just send you a scheduling link. And you can like pick a time if it's not urgent. And then I find that we don't teach people at a young age to check the context of the other person to see if the thing that seems urgent and important and like, we have to do this right now, is, as you said with your wife, like, I've got to have this conversation. We've got to clear up this context. And she's like, trying to get the kids to bed. I'm so tired. It's been I just want to sleep, and I'm happy to talk about this tomorrow. I feel like we don't do a good job at a young age of teaching kids to have the empathy to check the context of the other person before diving into conversation.
Yeah, I agree. And kids, it's rough for kids now because cell phones are their way of communicating, cell phones and texting. And you just watch teenagers walk around the world, and it's like they're not even looking up or looking at each other. So often they're just doing connection through their phone. And we're losing something big time right now in the world with the tech, which is, I love tech. It's got some downsides. So it's like setting the other thing, just to say it, is just, it seems
Yeah.
obvious, but a lot of us don't do it, which is just set the phone down and try to make eye
Right.
contact whenever you can with people. When you're in a hard conversation, it goes a long, long way.
I got to get the research on this. They did a study about, it's actually Simon Sinek who did the research, and about having a cell phone in the room, on the table, in conversation, increases the lack of presence and distractibility, even if the phone is turned over and face down.
Yeah,
But just the act of
100%.
having it in the environment, like we've gotten to the habit of going out for dinner as a family and actually like, like where do we put the phone? Stick them on the chair, stick them in a purse, stick them in a backpack, but don't
Leave them in
have
the
them
car.
actually, yeah, in the car. Like don't have them sitting on the table because they're like a third party to the conversation,
Yeah,
right? Like they're
that's right.
there, they're an entity that's there, a distractible entity. I'm curious, like, where are we going to land on all this? Like, these phones are everywhere. My daughter's got her phone. She's on TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and like iMessage. I don't know, mostly Snapchat, I would say. And that's their way of living. And she's 12, so she was 8 in the pandemic. So she was coming through this weird time
Right.
of growing up, and not being able to communicate. And she's an only child. And so partly
Yep.
for her, it was her one method of communicating with people through a great deal of the pandemic. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are, from a conflict perspective, because conflict can happen on Snapchat, it can happen on text message, it can happen on Zoom, in person, on a phone call. When and sometimes people are in conflict and they're trying to deal with that conflict over text. So what's the advice that you give to people about the modality? Like, what's the best place for them to be, or situation they can put themselves in relative to all these different communication methods, for them to have the best
Yeah.
possible outcome of de-escalating a conflict?
I always say, never, I just have a rule in my own life, and I share this with as many people as I can, which is never fight over text or email.
Yeah.
When someone comes with any heat toward me, a team member over Slack, an email I get, I just say it. I just validate their feelings. It sounds like, I reflect back. It sounds like you're pretty upset, which makes sense. And I never do this over email. So let's hop on a Zoom call,
Yeah.
and I'm sure we can work this out. And that's huge, right? And we don't do that in our family. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
modeling, you and your wife are modeling how to do conflict with your daughter, and she's picking it up just by it being in the home, right? And you and your wife aren't over there in separate parts of the house just fighting over text.
Texting each other. Yeah.
Yeah, or texting through your daughter, or, whatever. There's some
Right.
crazy, you wouldn't believe what I see over the years.
Yeah.
And I think The Anxious Generation, Jonathan Haidt's book, is a really good resource for parents, by the way, on the phone thing. But
Okay.
um, setting things down, setting them in the other room, back to old school eye contact, close proximity, moving together. These things all actually de-escalate, not escalate things. We just can't read tone of voice, facial cues, or anything like that over text. And so it's just not a good habit to get into. So I just tell people, don't do it. I'm curious what you think, and what about the workplace and how that's maybe different too.
It's the same, actually. Like, the reality, what we teach leaders is that like 75 to 93% of the communication is actually taking place nonverbal. And
Yeah.
so the argument can be, well, okay, so then I can use it on Zoom, but like you and I are both sitting here and can't see each other's hands. And
Right.
actually, our hand movement and how we gesticulate in conversation is actually a key part of it. But like if I rest my hands down right now, like you can't see them. So
Yeah.
you're even on Zoom, you're losing out a key part of
Yep.
the conversation by not being able to see the rest of my body language. And so
Yeah.
what we say to leaders is like, if there's any emotional content, try to do it in person. If it's a virtual remote team, yeah, Teams or Zoom is your next best thing. Phone would be the third, and literally text or email, never, because
Yeah. Never. I
text
say never.
messages, when people read them back, they add all this content to them, or emails add
Mm-hmm.
all this content to it. The other thing we've taught leaders is like, go and take your email, go into ChatGPT and say, this is a person I care about. I'm in a long-term relationship with them. I need to work with them, and I want to be proactive. I just wrote this email. Can you help me make it better? And
Mm-hmm.
if you have to write an email, or if use things like AI to help you clean it up, but tell it your intent. Tell it what you want as the outcome of a relationship. I care more about the long-term relationship with this person than I care about this conflict outcome going my way. Please
Yeah.
help me craft this in a way, or please help me craft what I'm going to say to that person in advance. The other thing we teach leaders, and when they're having difficult conversations, is that most people's preparation for a difficult conversation is to imagine how the conversation is going to go. I'm going to say this, they're going to say this, then I'm going to say this. That never plays out. It just never goes that way. And instead, we teach them a model where we say, like, what is your intent for the conversation? What is your intent for the relationship? You need to write all these things out, get clear on what your interests are, right? So what are your interests in this? Get clear on your beliefs and the beliefs that you're bringing to this conversation, and bring your concerns and write all that out in advance. Really, your success of the conversation is 85% preparation and 15% the actual conversation itself. And what's shocking is leaders will come back and say, I prepped for that difficult conversation. I did the format. It wasn't difficult. It like actually wasn't difficult. Like, oh, okay. Like when you had it. Yes. And now I've had more conversations like that, and they don't feel difficult either. And so there's this muscle that we can build around being in difficult conversations, or when we assume it's going to be a difficult conversation, in how we thoughtfully prepare, and then how we show up grounded in our curiosity and our empathy. As you say, right? First, understand what's going on for the other person, the LUFU. And so by having that place of listening, curiosity, and empathy, and preparing for the conversation, knowing what we want from the relationship, leaders come back to us and say, yeah, this is way easier than I thought. And I'm not fearful. Because when the fear content is there, what always occurs is delay.
Yep.
Or avoidance.
Delay,
Those are the
avoid,
two most favorite
procrastinate.
things.
Yeah.
And then what happens with delay and avoidance and conflict? Usually it's just a buildup of resentment. That's the outcome of the first two things. And so that's what I would reflect back about how we teach leaders.
Yeah, that's cool.
Same thing.
I love the intent piece, because I don't probably teach that enough, but it's like, is your intent to connect and repair, or is it to be right and prove your point and create division and one up them? Yeah. To be superior, to look good in front of your peers. It's just, we've got to check our motives. So I really like that reminder.
What I love about the work that you do, Jayson, I'm a big fan of therapy. I'm a big fan of counseling. Couples you've asked, Sabrina and I, we've both done lots of counseling individually. We've done work together, and people are always like, oh, should we consider this? I'm like, the fact that you're asking at all, the answer is yes. Right? The fact that you brought that up, the answer is probably yes. There's nothing to fear in going that route. Usually they're at a point where they don't have the skills. They're stuck. They're at an impasse in their relationship, and they do not know how to move forward. What's different about the work you're doing, even though you're trained in the work that I just described, is that you're working with people at the beginning and saying, like, hey, if you build these communication skills in advance, if you learn this conflict repair model, then you're less likely to be knocking on the door of a therapist in the future, because you'll have learned these patterns of behavior of communication in advance. And I love that you've devoted your life to, and you and your wife, to helping couples and supporting them on that journey, so that as we've talked about today, it isn't just about their conflict and repair cycle and how they deal with it, but they're also creating a blueprint for their children.
Yeah.
They're writing that blueprint that, as you say, between 0 and 18 years, those kids are going to go off and be in relationship in the future. And they're going to be using that cognitive blueprint that their parents built. I love that you are giving people those tools to help set them up for success. It's beautiful work. It's heartfelt work. And not enough people have had the benefit of having that, being able to be a part of that work.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we work with anyone at any stage, but it's really nice to catch people who are proactive instead of reactive, of course, because the pile just gets harder to deal with the longer you put this off. Yeah. And if that relationship ultimately terminates because you can't work through it, you get some temporary relief, but you're going to be right back where you started with your skills in the next relationship. And so, I love life because life will show you exactly where you're at developmentally, relationally, and there's no way around it. So you're going to get humbled either way to like, wow, this is not easy. I'm not great at this. And then you get to choose. Do I want to go learn how to improve this part of my life? Or do I kind of want to keep winging it and thinking I've got it and resorting to my default setting, which for a lot of us isn't that helpful. It's just like lifting weights. We can go do the reps and get stronger, become stronger communicators under stress, and it pays dividends, pays everywhere. Our kids benefit from it, our coworkers, the community. It's huge if we can all listen better and communicate better under stress.
We can't run because, unfortunately, as far away as we run, wherever we go, there we are. We're still right there. It's a beautiful statement about dealing with the realities of learning these things personally, no matter where we're at in relationships, so that we can bring them into the next relationship if a relationship is ending. Jayson, I really appreciate you making time to have this conversation. Your depth of experience and wisdom and truth bombs. And I appreciate you sharing all of those with us today.
You got it, Mike. So good to hang out with you and see you again.